Mhm. So let's go ahead and move down to the alphabetic principle. We talked a lot about alphabetic principle the other day, and it was just that awareness that the alphabet, those are components of words, right? And like if we know the alphabet and we know what they sound like, then what sounds they make, then we can construct words from that. So we understand that the alphabet represents symbols that when you put them together in different ways, we have reading. So they know how important, right, that the alphabet is not just this plaything, it's really part of reading. So they recognize it says that written letters represent spoken language. Okay, so I will give you about 30 seconds to answer that. Any questions on alphabetic principle? I know we've been covering it for some time, but still. All right, so that's our 30-second timer. So we're going to step out of alphabetic principle. We're going into grapheme. This one I know we went over at the very beginning. Anybody want to just write down what you're going to write on grapheme, or that you already wrote on grapheme? You want to share it out? Okay, so I'm going to give you guys all right, there's our 30 seconds on graphing. I know we're moving right along. We started it yesterday. That's okay. I can slow down if y'all are finding something that's difficult or whatever, and y'all need some more illustration. I'm good with that. So syllables and segmentation are basically when we take the words and they're broken into parts. Okay, so Sherelle has 2 syllables in her name, right? Sherelle. And we can clap it out. So we segment it. If it's written out like it is on the screen and I had to read it, that is not an easy name for, let's say, a kindergartner to read. They don't know what the sh is. If they know it, they're gonna think it's ch, right? And then the E at the end, they're not gonna know if they need to pronounce it or not. So they're gonna have to take her name and break it into 2 parts. They're gonna have to segment it and attack it that way. The sh and then the rel. And so that's why we segment words, because Catalina is long, it has like 4 syllables in it, right? So if we don't break it down into bite-sized parts, our students are not going to be able to sound it out. So that's why we need them to blend the segments, right? Like we do this thing with the arm. It's like Catalina, like, and then you blend cata, and then you add syllables until you know the whole word. So syllables are critical for being able to pronounce words, like words that are bigger than 1 syllable, like it. Okay, I get it. That's pretty easy. But what if I say thankful? You have to break that down. All right, so I'll give you 30 seconds on the syllables and segments. All right. Okay. So we're going down to decoding and encoding. It kind of just says it there. Right, decoding is basically when you're trying to decipher what those letters are saying. Encoding is when you have to spell it out and write it. So those are pretty easy. I'm just going to go straight into the 30 seconds for you to write it out if you haven't done it yet. Your explanation. Okay. Going down, we have reading fluency and how it relates to prosody. Okay, does anybody want to take this one or do you want me to take it? Okay. So essentially, fluency is how smoothly you read. You can be a jackrabbit reader, right? And you're reading fluently. That means you're going quickly, right? And smoothly. But that doesn't mean that you're reading with the correct intonation. It doesn't mean that you're reading with the correct pausing and the pacing and the voice of the storyteller, of the narrator. Like, if you are able to read with prosody, you understand more because you're reading it in the spirit with which it was written, right? You're honoring and observing all of that punctuation. So prosody is where it's at. Fluency is kind of the gateway to prosody, but there's a lot of children that don't make it into prosody and they get stuck in fluency. So we have to model that through our like read alouds and all of that. And also when we sit down and we read with them at the table, we should be helping them understand the voice and the pausing and, what does it mean to have a question? How do you read a question? The same as a declarative sentence? No, you have to read a question differently. I used to tell the students, questions kind of swing up at the end. I'd say reading fluency and how it relates to prosody, but it's like you have to say it a little longer and higher at the end if it's a question. Anyway, if students have prosody, they are able to understand what they're reading. So I'll give you 30 seconds to answer that, please. All righty. All right, going into the stages of writing. I'm going to be honest with you. Those are important. And if they come up, they tend to come up in a graph type of appearance, and they tend to be long and sometimes they look complicated. Like, let me show you what that looks like. I'll show you what it looks like on the ESL test. And the they pulled it. So a lot of times we'll do a graph on this one. I'm going to check in another couple of places so you can know what it looks like when it's tested. Here it is. So it'll look a little bit like this. It could look a little bit like this, because this is how they use it on different exams, right? So you'll see that in this case, we're talking about language acquisition. So they're in the process of learning English, but they can certainly take this and mimic it into the stages of writing, or they can do it and apply it to stages of reading. So you just have to be really comfortable with the labels of each of those stages, right? Pre-production, production, emergent, fluency, that's fine. I might say pre-production, production, emergence, transitional, and then fluency. Okay, so I just wanted to add that there so you guys could see that. What it could look like in testing. All right, so there's your 30 seconds. Go ahead and just kind of write out that answer for the stages of writing, please. Okay. And then I don't mind if you go ahead and you do the stages of reading too, because it's really the same thing. They use like the same labels for both of those. And I'll give you another 30 seconds to do the stages of reading. Okay. We're going to go ahead and jump ahead to the morphemes. There are two types of morphemes. Remember, morphemes are really just the smallest unit of a word with meaning. Some morphemes are really small, like I. It's one letter morpheme because I has a meaning, right? What about A? A has a meaning, so it's also a morpheme. So it carries meaning. Then you have, okay, another thing about morpheme is it's broken down into its smallest form. So let's say you have elephant. Elephant is a morpheme. You cannot break it down or you're going to lose the meaning of the word elephant. Like, can you break elephant down into a smaller version? No, because it stops being what it is. So some morphemes are long, some morphemes are just one letter, like I. But the most important thing is that morphemes carry meaning. It's like the smallest unit of a word that carries meaning. Now, then you have two types of morphemes. You have free morphemes. This is what I call base words: jump, heal, walk, talk, run. To me, these are base words, free morphemes. They make sense by themselves. A bound morpheme is a prefix or suffix. Like, let's say NESS for happiness, right? Ness is a suffix, but it doesn't make sense by itself. Can't say I went to the store and got Ness today. That does not make sense. So it's bound to it to be put into to be tied to a base word to make sense. They also call these dependent morphemes because they depend on being connected to a base word. Happiness. Oh, okay, that's perfect. Happiness. We know what that is. But you can't just say ness by itself because nobody knows what you're talking about. And it's not that we don't know what ness means. We know what ness means, but yeah, it doesn't make sense unless you connect it to a base word. So it's bound. So you have the free morpheme, which makes perfect sense by itself. It's independent. It is a base word. But then you have the bound morpheme that has to be tied to a base word to make sense. And do you want a further explanation on that, or are you good to go? Just thumbs up or thumbs down me. Okay, there's your 30 seconds for writing in the explanation. All right. We're going to say again.
Anthony, oh my dad. There's this lady at the dad I get information from and to switch over a light bill. And Daddy don't he's not able to do that and the lady didn't dad.
Teresa, can you hear me? Okay. We're going to do morphology and word analysis. So here we go. Morphology. We talked about, and I don't know if we said it in this class, but I usually say it in my other classes. If you want students to perform well in secondary, they have to know their morphemes. They need to know their prefixes, suffixes, and root words. They have to know those, because then you can give them a very difficult academic word in high school and they're going to be able to manage it, and they can stay on, they don't get lost in the vocabulary. They can spell better. They handle academic, like anatomy and physiology. They handle all of these college readiness classes because they know what the prefixes mean, they know what suffixes mean, and they know what root words mean. That is very empowering. And so, like, we especially, like, I cannot emphasize to you enough, I feel like extremely convinced that if we can teach our students from poverty, from whatever background, all of their prefix, suffixes, and base words, they're going to be 1,000% better positioned to make it to college. Okay, so that we must, I feel like this is our civil duty, right? Beyond just the reading and writing, they need to know morphology. And so they need to know what these words mean and like how they're put together. So if I'm talking about post-COVID, they need to know that means after COVID was over, the world after COVID was over. Pre-COVID world is not the same as post-COVID world. So we need to understand that pre, and post are not the same thing. So how do these word meanings change when we swap out these different units, these different morphemes, right? So morphology is just the study of how morphemes and how words are put together is how I would say. It's a study of how words are put together. I'll give you 30 seconds to answer that. All right. Okay, so I'm going to do a dip check now. I need to hear from you. Am I going too fast? Is it like good? Is it bad? Is it okay? Like, what's going on?
For me, it's okay.
Okay, good. Robinson. Say again, Teresa.
It's good.
Okay, good. Okay. All right, first, thank you. So we have the different types of assessments. And my question is funny because I'm just now noticing it doesn't match the visual perfectly, right? The pre-assessment, you're looking at a KWL chart. So I want you to know that the KWL is pre-assessment and post-assessment, right? So like that's what they love on TExES exam. We love KWL because we get to figure out what the students know. You are not being effective if you're teaching the life cycle to a group of students that covered the life cycle perfectly the week before you were hired. That is not good use of your time. So you have to do that pre-assessment. What do you know on about life cycle? If your students know the whole curriculum already because they took the test last week, don't waste your time. So KWLs are really good because they don't just tell you what students know and don't know, but they also they could save you time in planning. You know, you could be going the totally wrong direction. So that inventory, that pre-assessment is really important. I used to do the KWL, I'm not gonna lie. At the beginning of my career, the first 5 to 10 years, I would do the KWL pretty religiously. Then as I became a veteran teacher, I got a little slack. Okay. So what I would do is I would ask the students, what do you know about this? Right. Do you know about the, and I would get a feel for what they know. And then I knew, okay, in terms of me planning, I need to plan for it this way. It's not as good because the students don't get to monitor their learning. They don't have as much ownership of it. So like, you know, bah, what do you do? So like, but the pre-assessment is really good for KWL, okay? And they also, I told you y'all yesterday, it also means learning log, and it also means monitoring their learning, okay? So whenever they say those words on the test, they mean KWL. Bueno, we're gonna move forward with formative and summative, right? So we know that even though I'm only asking you this question about formal, cumulative, and summative, those are those high stakes tests. Like the STAR test would be a cumulative test, right? You cannot, because it's accumulating over the whole year, right? Then you have the summative, okay, because it's a summary of the whole year. Is it a formal test? Yes, but a unit test can also be a formal test, right? Although a unit test may not be a cumulative test because it's just that one unit. So it's a formal test because it's like a major grade or whatever. So anyway, those three are put together because they're all high accountability. That's what I said yesterday before we got this visual up here. I said, if people are going to be looking at those grades on that test, that's going to be a high accountability grade. Consider it formal, consider it summative, consider it cumulative. So I'm going to give you guys time to answer. 30 seconds. Go. Formal, summative, cumulative. Alrighty, moving right along. We're looking now at informal, informative, and formative. Those are all put together because they are not as closely monitored. They may not even go in their grade book. I have done so many formative assessments that are way more useful than the silly unit exam that's ABC 1, 2, 3, multiple choice, right? Like those formative assessments are very useful. So you get, and nobody probably ever even asked for those, right? But they're yours to have in your binder because it shows you where that student falls in terms of their mastery of whatever concept. So good teachers are constantly running formative assessments. I got a little Post-it note right here. I want to see if little Ricky pronounces his R today because yesterday he couldn't pronounce his R. And in my Post-it note or on my legal pad, right? I have little Ricky here. I'm like, Ricky, can you make that sound? And then voila, he says, I'm like, awesome, Ricky. Check that on my little formative thing and move on with my life. But you're meticulous about your work. So you do formative assessments, right? You care, right? Well, even what's not monitored is still getting done because it's the right thing to do, right? So that's where you get those informal assessments. Those, if they're informative to you, that's what they call them, informative, but they're formative because it's helping you form an idea about little Ricky. Okay, so take your, are we good on that? Go ahead and take 30 seconds to answer. These are my those are my favorite of all the assessments. I also love the portfolio because that really gives us a good idea of where students are, but I don't even think they do portfolios anymore. Love the progress monitoring. Man, those are fun. So the progress monitoring is where you chart their data, right? You're looking at data as it goes on 6 weeks by 6 weeks. Let me pull it up real quick because it's worth a look. Just because I don't know what y'all do. I don't know. I don't know. Like I have an idea of where you're working, but you could be in a pocket of excellence and you could be in a pocket of not so much excellence. And I want to be sure that you get what, you know, at least you know what these things look like. Yeah, gotcha. So this is like, can y'all see these charts? Can you see April? Okay. So this, for example, is like my students in reading, right? And so I'm monitoring their reading levels. This was 2021. Monitoring their reading levels in Spanish. I'm monitoring their reading levels in English, right? I color coded. And then I wrote down here if this child is in tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, right? I also wrote in if they're a newcomer, are they GT, you know, like are they SPED? This child was retained. We don't retain kids. You go, oh, please do not retain children. Their likelihood of dropping out goes up by 3 times. They're 3 more times likely to drop out. And they just get a repeat of the same stuff. So if it didn't work for them last year, why would it work for them this upcoming year? What they need is intervention. They need to be tier 3. They need tier 2 supports, not to be held back. So it's like, so this is progress monitoring. I'm monitoring their progress, right? Every once in a while on a math test, I'd have a student go down. Oh, that would drive me crazy. But then I would notice, okay, look, they went up 20 points. This child went down 20 points. I coded it red, right? So it's how you monitor and how you chart their progress. You know, this one lost values. I watched them closely. Don't want students losing. All right. Anyway. So that's another form of like assessing because you're watching them closely, right? You can do it on a chart. You can do it on, you know, on even like a little chart for just one kid. And so I did that with my whole class. All right. So criterion assessments are covered here, and you're just looking to see that they are like meeting certain criteria. Let me see if I have a minute. I didn't pull up a visual for that. Yeah. So did they master a set of criteria like STAR test? So the STAR test is, did they master like perspective, author's perspective? Did they master inferencing? Did they master story elements? So like that is all like criteria. Did they master it? Yes, yes, yes. It's like they're trying to just check to see that they mastered all the TEKS for 5th grade. So that's going to be their criteria. All right. That is very different than what they call a normed reference test. And I didn't write that on here. The opposite of that, the opposite of that is a normed reference exam. The norm reference exam is when they, when they're comparing children to each other. So the MAP test that, I don't know, do y'all do MAP testing over there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the norm reference exam, I think you're out of Aldine, right, Teresa?
Yeah.
Everyone else is in Longview. Hey, do y'all do it in Longview, the MAP test in Longview? Yes. Okay. So the MAP test, compares them to other students across the country. And it's very aligned to the STAR test, by the way. That's one good test, is the MAP test. So it compares them to other students across the country. And not just that, it floats up. Like if a student is really high and they're in 3rd grade, they could be getting tested on 5th grade TEKS, or not TEKS, but standards, right? Because it's a national test, right? So we don't have TEKS nationally, but we have standards. So, that is what we call a normed reference test. Okay, Iowa tested basic skills, ITBS. That's fine, April, thank you. So ITBS is also normed referenced. And that's the opposite of a criterion exam, because a criterion exam is just checking to see if they mastered those criteria for 4th grade or for that unit. So go ahead and take your 30 seconds and just fill that out. Criterion exam. Okay. We have about 10 seconds left on that. So it's checking them against the criteria, certain criteria for a grade level. Okay. It doesn't care, the criterion exam doesn't care if you have 5th grade skills and you're a 3rd grader. They don't give you the opportunity to show that. A normed reference test will, because they'll go up to the high school if they need to on that 2nd grader. So I like normed reference tests, if you didn't notice. I like it much better than criteria exam, because I feel like our criteria exams are limiting. Because we have a lot of GT babies, and those GT babies need to show me what they can do. So I like the normed reference test. And you may be GT in math, but not so GT in reading. So like, that's why I love the MAP test. I really do. I like it. But I like it best when it's given in the language that the child speaks. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. Right? If I have a newcomer speak Spanish, I'm going to find that MAP test and give it to them in Spanish to figure out what they know. So then we have the portfolio assessment, and we said the portfolio assessment is when you want to collect data and show growth over time. There's really that's to me the best way to say it, is to show growth over time. So feel free to answer that. And I'm going to move forward with the universal screening. And the universal screening is essentially almost diagnostic. It's not diagnostic yet. So you're looking at a universal screening is when you're looking for something and you have to check everybody for it. When I was a little kid, they used to have to check for scoliosis. when I was a teacher too, right? They would check our classes for scoliosis. Y'all know, do they do that anymore? Yeah,
Yes, I remember for my daughters. Yes.
okay. That's a universal screening. They're checking everybody because they have to check for this one thing. And so you could be screening for scoliosis, you could be screening for giftedness. You could be screening for anything. So anyway, that's a universal screening. They're just trying to they're trying to identify children that, period. They're just trying to identify children. Like who may or may not have a certain characteristic or medical need. When I was in Boston and I did 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in the same classroom, right? And they were all newcomers. They all had to take a universal screening for hearing.
Yes.
Yes. And I was so surprised because 80% of my class came up deaf or partially deaf. Like not totally deaf, but like partially, yes. Hard of hearing. I only had a few students that didn't. So all of my students, interestingly enough, were from the islands. They were from Puerto Rico, they were from Dominican Republic, and they were from like Honduras, right? So those children, I talked to the screener and I said, why do I have so many students? Because these are students that, remember, they didn't know how to read when they came to me in Spanish. And I said, is that one of the components, one of the reasons they didn't have phonemic awareness because they were unable to hear? And she said, people born on the islands tend to have, because they have a lot of intermixing with the same families, even though they don't mean to. They have such a small island that over time they tend to intermix. And so that, she said, causes the hearing loss, which I thought was crazy. So she's like, the tinier the island, the higher the rate of hardness of hearing. Okay. And my two students that were not hard of hearing were from Mexico, and it's a huge country, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't know that was a thing. I told her, I can't believe what I'm hearing. Like, I did not know this was a thing.
Be careful. Text me whenever you.
So universal screening. Diagnostic is different though. Diagnostic now is when you're trying to get them to qualify, right? So let's say you start with a universal screening and now I'm doing a diagnostic. So they're doing that full battery for SPED, right? They're doing their diagnostic for dyslexia. So now you're trying to get them to qualify, not trying to get them, but you're trying to identify them to see if they qualify for special services. These are diagnostics. You cannot give a diagnostic without parent permission because you could kick in government benefits. And some of their parents don't want their children identified.
Yes.
So diagnostics are very private because they're medical in nature. So you're thinking SPED. When you're thinking diagnostic, you're thinking SPED. And when I think SPED, I think medical. And that now I'm thinking legal.
Yes. Yes.
So, right. Very different than universal screening, which is, hey, we're just checking everybody for scoliosis. Right? No special treatment. This isn't going to kick anything in. We're just
I have a comment. I have a student who, as soon as he got in, he's running around the classroom. He's I'm teaching, and he's not he's sitting down where he's supposed to be at. He's running around since September, and the principal got it right away because it's my third year teaching. Got it right away. He's undiagnosed or unlabeled, and she wants the child or the student to be labeled. And it's not until April 27th to his art. Since September until April, all that's a long process.
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
all pretty normal. You're lucky to get it the same year.
But they say that in I mean, he's gonna be in my class for the rest of the year. But for the following year, he's gonna go. I don't know where he's gonna be at, but in my class, he's gonna be in mine. He's not gonna get service until next year.
That's how that works.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is why you end up, and all the behaviors he's manifested, right? So you get that student or students similar to that 3, 4, 5 years, and then you become ready to take that SPED test.
Yes,
Because you get
I
experience with this population.
I even got bit yesterday from him and scratched.
Oh, I'm so
Mhm.
sorry.
No, it's okay. That's why I was late. I was late. I had to report it.
Right. Wow. Okay. Inquiry skills. Thank you for that, Teresa. Inquiry skills or inquiry skills are basically, let's see, inquiry skills is where it's almost tied to giftedness. It is tied to giftedness. It's like you're giving them the opportunity to inquire and learn and investigate in things that they are interested in. So we want to encourage inquiry, and inquiry should be part of our teaching process. So go ahead and write that out and you can answer that. Inquiry is critical to student engagement. And it's critical to, project-based learning tends to be developed around inquiry skills. That's really good. I'm big on like GT too. Love GT. Every student should get GT services, even if they're not GT, because they're GT at something. So GT really just says choice, voice, and project-based learning. You get some semblance of choice. You get voice, that means I care about what you're interested in, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to learn about that. And then project-based learning means you get to do a project on your trip to New York City. How about that? Let's talk about transportation. Let's talk about mileage. Let's talk about, and they get to do projects on the things that they're interested in. And I think every child would do better at school if they were given those options. So fluency, how do you improve it? This is pretty self-explanatory. Go ahead and take your 30 seconds to answer that. I like this because it shows how these are all connected, but they're different. Capacity is the golden star there. Okay. Phonemic awareness, we've covered that kind of already above. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer that. Notice that it begins with rhyming, right? And then syllables, right? So songs and rhyming are the first thing that we work on when they're little bitty, 3, 4 years old. 5, 6 years old, that's when they're putting together words and breaking them into syllables and learning to sound them out. And then in 2nd grade, now they're working on their fluency in 2nd grade. And their morphology. All right, good. We're moving into, this is the same process. So you can literally probably copy and paste, but I'll give you 30 seconds to answer that. I think I put that there. I know I put it there twice on purpose, just because I want it nailed in there.
Thank you.
That's a critical one, and it'll show up on every test. The STR, some of you are going to have to take the STR. It's going to show up there. It's going to show up on your ESL test. It's going to show up on everything. All right. Differentiation. Okay. Same lesson, different supports. Okay. Same lesson, different supports. So that's about the easiest way I can say it. Non-differentiation. So go ahead and take your, so everyone's working on reading. Some of you guys are working on fluency. Some of you guys are working on inferencing. Some of you guys are working on author's perspective. And some of you guys are working on blending words and sounding out words. Right? So everyone's doing it a little differently. So that's really, differentiation is, in a weird way, it's an art form, because you begin, as you learn your content, you begin to identify strengths and weaknesses in the area. Every child needs to be pushed. Or don't know if you know, but gifted students have 9 toes out of the building. They're hanging on by a pinky toe. And when they get to high school, they're ready to drop out. So our gifted students have to have differentiation too, or we're going to lose them.
Yes.
Right. So right. My son dropped out. I had to give him, he was identified gifted in kindergarten. I created an online virtual school for him and all of his friends that would they literally got ran out of the school by the administrator. He was carrying his girlfriend's backpack to school, and they said, if you don't want to be here, you're going to be wandering the halls, get the heck out of the building. Well, don't tell that to a gifted child, because they're about ready to go anyway. They said it 3 times. The 3rd time he walked home and he said, Mom, I'm going back there. I'm taking Lana's backpack and I'm carrying her backpack because that's my girlfriend. I'm like, really? This is carrying girlfriend's backpacks is not a crime. This is a rite of passage, people. That's how we get babies to populate this country. Like, come on now. Don't be throwing black and brown kids out of school because they're carrying backpacks. So they did. All of his friends were thrown out of school. So he was one of them, and I said, mijo, we're gonna fix this. I created a virtual school, and we got them all to get their homeschool diploma, and they all graduated. But GT is really critical. So we need to be giving rigor to these students. And he just opened his LLC in finance, because it's not that he doesn't know. He did his whole senior year and his whole senior project on financial literacy. So they just need to do what they love, right? Our GT kids. And so differentiation, we think about it as something that only exists for the struggling students. It's really necessary for the struggling students. No lie. It's really necessary. But it's also necessary for the high kids. All right, the only kids that, let's say, it's not hugely necessary for are probably most of us here that are teachers. We were high performing, we were intelligent in school. We may or may not have been GT, but we were mostly compliant, hopefully, And those kids are going to be fine, but that's only like maybe 20% of your class. Most of your class is low if they match the United States of America. Most of your class is below grade level. And then you have a few that are going to be really high. Those just as dangerous as those at the bottom of your list. Differentiation, I cannot tell you enough how important it is. We have MTSS, which is essentially what we use for, when you're trying to get them identified into special education services. Jennifer, we're probably looking at about 6:30. And special education services. Tier 1 means everybody in the classroom is getting it. That's tier 1. That's the direct teach, whole class. Tier 2 is small group. Tier 3 is I'm creating time in the day for tutoring, one-on-one tutoring, okay? So we used to, when I was in leadership, we used to say 1 scoop, 2 scoops, 3 scoops. If I'm giving that child 3 scoops, then they're probably on their way to SPED if they don't gain understanding and they're in tier 3. Like that's already documenting. If they're in tier 3, we should already be documenting in case. It is not, you can't be sure that all tier 3 students, that most of them will not qualify for SPED. They're not SPED, they just need help. But your SPED students will definitely be in tier 3. That's almost sure. You have your tier 2, which is just small group. Every kid should be getting small group at some point in time. Like I said, even the high kids. All right. We talked about Brown. I hope you guys are kind of writing as we're talking. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of keep it rolling. So I want to be done by about 6:15-ish. Mom versus board. Right. This is how I remember my father went to desegregated schools when he was a junior in high school. He is a Brown man. Therefore, I remember Brown versus board. As he was desegregated and like his schools were desegregated and he went to a brick school for the first time in his life when he was a junior. And so Brown versus board. Madison versus Marbury came up in our social studies. This is when we have to check like the constitutionality of these proposals. Like, is this? And so the courts have to basically cross-reference and make sure that laws are constitutional. And I'm really glad that that's there. Like, I'm hoping that they're using that. Yeah. So then we have Plessy versus Ferguson. This upheld segregation. This affirmed segregation, but it is 1896. This was over 100 years ago. Of course, they affirmed segregation. They were just coming out of the Civil War. They were not, the general population of the US was not ready to desegregate. Civil Rights of 64. This is where, I mean, this follows the desegregation. Obviously, desegregation was 1954. Schools were desegregating. And then in Civil Rights of 1964, now we're no longer discriminating based on race, gender, or national origin. All right, we're at the IDEA. IDEA basically talks about the rights of disabled students. And they need to have an IEP. And that IEP has to be followed. And if it's not followed, then it's a violation of IDEA. So we have to be following those IEPs. FERPA, we talked about it yesterday. It is about the right to privacy. Names and student records are all private and they're protected by FERPA. Next one is importance of accountable talk. Okay, that's it. We discussed that. If you're talking, then you are learning more. This is why you guys enjoyed like the breakout rooms yesterday. I'm hoping you guys, you know, we got to keep it going, but ideally you guys would be doing more talking right now would be a perfect time. So discussion is really critical for them retaining the information. But at least you're writing, so that's like interacting with but really, so we're going to move on to the various learning styles, just in case they didn't cover it. Visual, auditory, kinesthetic. Yeah. Mostly they'll just talk about visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. But you have to teach to all of them. So you're doing visuals because we have high visuals on this test right now, on this vocabulary quiz. We're doing auditory because we're talking to you. You're doing kinesthetic because you're writing out the answers. So we're involving all three at the same time. So when you teach, you should teach consistently to as many of those as possible. On the TExES exam, there's a philosophy about technology. Technology is there to support you, not replace you. So teachers are teaching the students, not technology. And we know that because the state of Texas doesn't expect you guys to teach. They don't create programs to teach your students. They have vendors that do that, but the state does not do that. How does the state of Texas use technology? To grade your STAR test and to give you like disaggregated data based on like how they scored. So basically, technology is there to score your exams. That's what they do for TELPAS. That's what they do for STAR. Okay, not to replace you. So that's why they'll say things like, put the child on a headset and have this headset read it. No, headset's not going to teach this child. Right? So we don't get to put children on technology as a babysitter. We need to teach them ourselves and own that. Zone of proximal development is on every test I've ever taken at the state level. Vygotsky's ZPD. So you are always teaching to the next level of learning. All right, so what that means is this week they're learning adding with 1-digit numbers. Next week they're learning adding with 2-digit numbers. The following week they're adding with 3-digit numbers, okay? That is ZPD. It's the next logical sequence in learning. So you're always teaching to the next thing. You're not teaching them stuff they already know.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So ZPD is el próximo, la próxima cosa, the next thing coming up. That's what you're teaching them. Thinking maps, concept maps, retaining information, organizing information in the head, helping them retain it long term. Graphic organizers, these are fabulous. Thinking maps are better than just any old graphic organizer. These are created by neurologists. And they're designed to match the way that the brain retains information long term. So this is not like, oh, I'm going to pull something off teacher, pay teacher, whatever. I would say, mugrero. No, we're going to do thinking maps because thinking maps is the way the brain retains information. We're not going to just go with some lady's artistic drawing of a star and pretend there's 5 parts of a story. No, we're going to stick with thinking maps, you guys. Thinking maps used to be mandatory for everybody in the districts that you're currently in. The reason why you don't have to do thinking maps anymore is only because the districts got tired of spending that money every year and giving it to the thinking map company, not because it stopped being viable.
Okay.
Yeah, and in fact, it's so good that it's all over your TExES exams, and they expect you to know it, even though nobody's spending money on teaching it to you anymore. I'm a trainer of trainers for thinking maps, and I don't get paid for the plug. I don't really care. This is just good teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So morphology is to understand academic vocabulary. We've talked about morphology already. But this is an example of how you can use morphology. It could be like hydrology. The root of the word is hydro. The prefix is or suffix is ology, which means the study of. Clues in the text that help me mean this are going to be the words around it. They're talking about water. And the illustration of the word might be just a drawing of them. So this is actually what I used to use for my students when they had their academic vocabulary. Every night they had to do one of these. Anyway, you're just writing in the benefits of using these sprayer models. This is that high level one. And this is like the elementary level one. So I'll let you answer those. All right. Culturally responsive is, again, text. We talked about that already yesterday. You want to have diverse text that match your student population. And then if you have absolutely no minorities, it's that much more important that you add at least one or two texts from minorities so the students can develop an awareness of other humans that share the planet with them, right? So we want them to be developing that cultural consciousness. Again, describing that culturally responsive instruction. This is it. We want, I think I covered this yesterday with you guys. We're drawing on the culture of the students. We're pushing back on negative narratives too. They don't say that here, but you can certainly do that. You're pushing negative narratives back into a little hole where they belong at the bottom of the ocean. So cultural responsive education is really critical because if we don't educate our students, they're going to believe every doggone lie that is told to them by people that don't understand anybody from other backgrounds. So that's critical. Marzano and role play is the next piece. We went over this real in detail yesterday. So I'll just give you a couple of seconds to fill it in if you haven't done it yet. It's what they use to teach vocabulary with. And it's a great way to teach vocabulary, but I use it also as a means of teaching y'all to be successful on the TExES. If you follow those same rules on the TExES exam, you'll do great. Okay, we talked about small grouping. Right, so small grouping is just a means of giving a child like tier 2 instruction, but it's also making sure that they get what they need. Right, scaffolding is gonna be when you break it down into chunks, you can either break it, you're breaking it into chunks. This one asks about sheltered instruction. Okay, y'all aren't in my ESL class, but I do want to tell you, just in case it were to come up, on sheltered instruction, that means you're providing supports to help students understand the lesson. And the supports could be thinking maps, it could be visual audio supports, it could be technology supports, it could be any of those. Those are all sheltered instruction. If y'all think ESL strategies are sheltered instruction. Sheltered instruction means ESL strategies. Scaffolding is chunking the lesson. The next part, I'm going to let you go ahead and kind of work through them. Do you want me to do the questions with you? Or are you good? Yes? Okay. Yes, you want me to do them, right, Rob? Okay. So we're in the question, additive bilingualism. And this is really an attitudinal thing, and it's also helpful on the TExES. So you always want to think of how can I add more to their bilingualism and their cultural identity? And the texts are a really good way of doing that, providing like just, that rich support. So it is the idea that a second language is good. So it's that second language is added to a first language. And it's also seen as broadening the language skill. So this is how I talk about bilingual students. They have one language bank supported by two sources. Means they have just more words floating around in their ocean and their brain. They have more words, more vocabulary. And it's because it's got two rivers feeding into it. It has the English River and the Spanish River, and that's feeding into the ocean. So that's good, y'all. That's not bad, right? More is better. So a second language added to a first is seen as a positive, right? Effective filter is the emotional, socio-emotional wellness of the child. If the child is feeling bad, Tanya, don't worry, I'm recording it so that y'all can get it.
Okay.
So if the socio-emotional wellness is bad and they're not getting it that day, they're not feeling good, they've been attacked, they've been isolated, they've been punished, they've been yelled at, they've been called ugly by their peers, anything, they're hungry, their jeans are dirty, okay? If it's any of that, they can't learn. So we have to bring down their emotions to a happy, neutral place so that they can receive information and stop focusing on the negative. Because when you're focusing on the negative, you just can't learn. So this is one of the reasons why I try to start class with like a song. I don't do it all the time, right? I need to do it more. But like today I was putting on Celia Cruz because it puts me in a happy place, right? And if it puts me in a happy place, maybe it'll put you in a happy place too. So I try to like bring in something that's gonna like pick up the learning vibe. Like let's just forget about our crappy administrators or the guy yelled at us, you know, when we're turning today, whatever. And let's just focus on, so be happy so we can learn and retain this information for your test. So it's your, right, and a filter is that psychological barrier. We want the filter to go down so that we can learn. Authentic is, the more authentic, the better. I saw a picture of a teacher, it was a video on Facebook or something, and it was a teacher and she was doing like the dab and some sort of like dancing thing. And I was like, are you kidding? So that the reason the students were going wild because she was really good. And they love it because she's authentic, right? So whenever we have authentic materials that look and sound like us, we get really excited. I gave this little, we went over the Celia Cruz book with Teresa a couple weeks ago. And Teresa, remember the video?
Yes, ma'am.
Just so you're like, your eyes lit up. You're like,
Yeah.
and that's what happens, right? When we see ourselves in the content, we get excited and we get engaged and we're there. So that's what we need to do with our students as much as possible, right? Music that we put on should be like music that will connect with them at some level. Sometimes I would even give them music that doesn't connect with them just so they could be exposed to different types of music. That's important too, right? So biculturalism is just, you have two cultures. You don't have to be an ethnic minority to have two cultures. I am very conservative, but there are points that I feel like there's gray area. You could be a person from poverty who is now a lawyer and you are bicultural because you function amongst your back home friends. You use one type of language. You eat one type of food. You associate using certain types of language. And then when you're in court, you have a different way of being. So that person's bicultural. They have the working class culture and the upper crust elite culture. And they navigate both of those. I think a lot of times we are bicultural and we just think about it in terms of ethnicity, but you can't tell me that person doesn't have two different societies that they function between. So bilingual, again, we know, developing two language banks in the process of language development. Yeah, we're looking at the last one. By literacy, you're reading in both languages. So it's the top one. You're literate in both languages. Your BICs are those social skills. So this one's going to be you would think that I know this. It's going to be the skills of the phenomena of developing two language banks and process of language development. I'm going to go with the bottom one. Well, skills necessary for functioning everyday life, face-to-face interaction.
It's C.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. It's skills because it's everyday social life. Okay, thank you for that. CALP is just academic. So literacy and academic achievement. Yes, 5 to 7 years. CALP is the bottom one. Comprehensible input. This is the same as ESL strategies. This is when you have to teach using some sort of magic to make it understandable for the students. So like I was saying, comprehensible input, all the visuals that I put together for this activity, they're all comprehensible input, right? So there's different ways to do comprehensible input, but that's one way. Strong visuals is one way. So, language and content that's understood by the learner, that's comprehensible input. Code switching is you're swapping between English and Spanish. That's how it generally means. But again, I mean, you could code switch arguably in English if you have different variations of English. So it is going to be the use of words from a given language while speaking in another, the first one. Connotation, okay, connotation is implied meaning. Like, okay, so when I said you don't have to be an ethnic minority to be bicultural, the implied meaning is you can be white and be bicultural, right? If you come from two different societies. So there's a sense of, I have this culture that I practice here and that culture I practice there. The implied meaning is you can be white, you don't have to be an English learner, right? And I say that for many reasons. Like, why do I say that? Mostly I say that because I want you to connect. I want you to understand these concepts and be able to see how they are relevant to you in your life. Because if you can see how they relate to you in your own life and they are expressed in your own life, then you can not just master the concepts more easily, but you can also feel more connected to the students that you have that are traditionally bicultural, right? They don't feel like so alien to you because you have a semblance of biculturalism too. So it brings everything, right? Everything I do is, of course, trying to build that capacity and that empathy and that ability, right, to be effective in classrooms that are diverse. Connotation is you have the connotation is like that implied meaning. What's the implied meaning? Culture, we all have it. That's going to be the bottom one. We all have culture. It's not like one group doesn't have culture. We all have culture. Culture shock is when you are the frustration, anger, depression, whatever. We're feeling like we are in this place where we don't belong and we're freaking out a little bit. That's that realization. Like one of these kids is doing their own thing and that's me, right? So that's that culture shock piece. Frankie, I recorded the class, so you're good. The English learner is the term for, right, new term for ELL. ELL is used interchangeably with limited English proficient. ESL is English as a second language. Funds of knowledge means that we appreciate the skills that students bring with them to school. A pedagogical approach that values the skills students bring with them to school. Heritage language is your first language and child's native language. Language is like the sounds that carry meaning, the second one. It's our innate ability to use abstract symbols to communicate meaning. Language objectives are, these are tied to ELPS standards, listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So whatever we do, we should be doing listening, speaking, reading, and writing every day in class. Lowry Nichols is that top one, Supreme Court case. Morpheme, we already know it's the meaning. Smallest unit of meaning, second one, B. Morphology is the study of meaning, how they're put together, A. Multiple modes, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, bottom one. Right, your phoneme is that smallest unit of sound. Help me, who was it last time? Was it you, Tonga? The awareness. It's not phoneme because that would be the first one. So I guess it would be the bottom one.
Which one are you on?
Phonemic awareness.
Phonemic.
I don't like these. These are like outdated definitions. The ability to, these are the definitions provided by the state, you guys. The ability to deal explicitly with segmental sounds. Yes, that's probably it. That's it. C, the third one. Dealing with segmented sounds. Phonics. Words are created. Involves teaching children to connect sounds with letters or group of letters. I'm going to go with A, first one. Realia is a word that comes up on your test and nobody uses it, only on the test. And it's when you use the real thing. So let's say that you're teaching cylinders and you use like a cup to teach cylinders with. Okay, so that's like you use a real thing that they can touch, a tangible item. That's going to be what the first one, maintain that. Realia, concrete objects from everyday world. Last one. Scaffolding is going to be that chunking it. One. Teacher provided supports. Yeah, semantics is a study of linguistic meaning. That's the first one. Shelter destruction is basically ESL strategies. The second one. Teaching style founded on the concept of providing meaningful instruction in the content area for transitioning towards higher academic sheltered instruction. Teacher provided instruction for many users. Oh man, that's hard. They say the same thing, but I'm still sticking with B anyway. A and B say the same thing pretty much. Stereotyping is overgeneralizing about a certain group of people. That's the last one. Subtractive bilingualism is you do speak two languages, but I think that's not good. So how about we erase one of them? Right? So that's second language interferes with the first language. You would be smart, but you speak two languages, and so sorry about that. See? It's not good, you guys. So subtractive bilingualism is the total opposite of what we should be thinking. Right? So a second language, it's like this. Here's just how I usually say it. I get some freedom in the ESL class. I don't want you to don't forget your Tagalog just because you moved to the United States. you need to be practicing that with your mom. You need to, and it's always celebrating, and sustaining and extending that first language. But at school, we're going to just add that second language. Totally different conversation, right? So, and it strengthens their identity, because if we start saying things that, like, even accidentally say things that diminish their identity, you're now creating a coercive environment. That child now sees you as the dominant oppressor. And even if they don't have the words to say it that way, they feel that way, right? And they respond at the very cellular primal level. They have to push back against you because you represent something that attacks their identity. So we have to be really careful about how we frame it, right? So it's always additive bilingualism. I think it's awesome that you speak Spanish. We're going to add on that English, right? All right. So I'm going to pause the recording because